they didn't even know it. You know he had to be smart. He had to be smart to operate such a clandestine stealth operation, and nobody knew anything about what he was doing but Jesus. The rest of them was average. So much so that the people were amazed at what they were getting accomplished. They were saying, how can these unlearned people, not formally educated, they called them ignorant, but they weren't ignorant, they really were just not formally educated. They were very intelligent, but they were average. How can they accomplish so much? And all they conclude is they've been with Jesus. When we do God's work, people can't explain how we get done what we get done. There's no explanation for it. If you can explain how you're getting done what you're getting done, then God ain't in it. Because God don't start until you get to where you can't explain it. And so we should have work as a church. We should have work as families, work as individuals that is inexplainable. That's where a testimony comes in. A testimony is an answer. It's an explanation of the otherwise unexplainable. So they've come to the conclusion that he's doing things, we don't know how he's doing it. He's getting things done. We can't imagine. He must be a prophet. God has to be with him. So now Jesus enters Nazareth of Galilee with prophet status. Now you would think if he was real smart, he would call in all of his press agents, his public relations people, and say, now how do we protect this prophet status? Okay. We have this prophet status. We have this incredible brand. We're the hottest thing in Jerusalem, so how do we protect it? So they would have come to him, and they will counsel him and say, well, don't say this, because that will be controversial. Don't say this, that will be controversial. Don't say this, that will be controversial. Don't say anything that's controversial. Maintain your popularity and your status. Now, Jesus was either God in the flesh, or he was a deranged individual. It can't be no other way. He was either God in the flesh, or he was a deranged individual that was mentally unstable, because nobody that was mentally stable would have did what he did, throw away all of the capital that he had and the status that he had the very same day, unless they knew that God was with him. I mean, he comes in now. I'm talking about he comes in to a hero's welcome. He basically could have had the key to the city. All he had to do was to say the right things, do the right things, and not offend the wrong people. And what did he do? He went straight to the temple. He went straight to the temple, and he committed the most controversial act that he could have admitted at the very peak of his popularity. At the very peak of his popularity, he insulted the most powerful people in Jerusalem that controlled the religion, they controlled the politics, and they controlled the economy. And then you tell me who in their right mind, at the peak of their popularity, would squander away all the popularity clout that they had just received unless they knew that God was with them. So he goes to the temple. He went into the temple of God. He drove out those who bought and sold. He turned over the money changers. He overturned their tables. One of the other texts says that he took a whip and he beat the people out of the temple. Now, why would he do that at the peak of his popularity? He could not have committed a more controversial act. This is a Passover. This is bigger than the Super Bowl. So that the merchants are in the temple, and they're selling their wares, they're exchanging money, they're selling turtle doves and pigeons for sacrifices. They are having a big business. I mean, a whole lot of money is exchanging hands. And he goes in and he tears it all up, rips it all apart. Could not have committed an act that would be more controversial. It would have more people angry and upset with him. Now, why did he do it? He did it because the temple activity, it had become the symbol of the Jewish apostasy. And that simply means it symbolized how far they had really fallen away from God, thinking they were still serving God. Here they have turned the temple into a super Walmart, a Super Rite Aid, a Walgreens, a Sam's, a Lowe's, a Sears, all in one. And now the commerce in the temple has more attention than prayer and worship. As a matter of fact, where they were discharging this flea market, all this commerce, was called the common place or the court of the Gentiles. It's the only place the Gentiles could come. So it's the place the Gentiles would come, and that's where evangelism was to take place of the Gentiles. And so instead of evangelizing the Gentiles and telling them how great God was, all the Gentiles were seeing was an economic bazaar. And it became a symbol of their spiritual corruption and their economic greed and exploitation. Because what they were doing, they were using religion to fleece the people. They were using religion to extort money from the people. Well, how were they doing that? This is how they were doing it. On the Jewish Passover, every Jewish male 20 years of age or above had to come to Passover, had to bring his family, and there has to be a sacrifice for every family, a blood offering. So many of the people were coming from many miles away. And they would bring their rams or their bullock, their sheep, or whatever else. They would bring it with them to Jerusalem. When they would show up at Jerusalem, the priests would be out there and would say, nah, that one got a spot, that one got a blemish. So they would reject the people's sacrifice. They said, we'll sell you one over here. So they were selling them sacrifices for exorbitant amounts of money. They were robbing the people. And then the people were coming from different lands, and they would bring the currency that was used in the country they were coming from. But they wouldn't accept their offering in that currency. They would then charge them exorbitant exchange rates to convert their currency into a currency they could accept. You couldn't afford to go to church. You went to church, and they would take everything but the clothes on your back. And it was the most exploitive and most damaging to the poor. So the poor people would come to Jerusalem to worship, and they would leave, in many cases, bankrupt. And the money had exchanged hands. It was the greatest wealth transfer scheme ever created. And Jesus looked at that, and it had been going on for years. And now was the time to expose it, expose the sham for what it was. And that's why he did what he did so dramatic, so profoundly, so powerfully. This was serious business. It's serious business to misrepresent God. It is serious business to use God to execute and discharge some Ponzi scheme by manipulating people because of their need to come to the Lord, and we use promises that they're going to get something if they give us all their money. This is powerful. So the whole religious system had become a system of oppression, and on one day, Jesus used all of his social capital, all of his social popularity, and he leveraged it on one day. In this act right here, it was the act that served as a tipping point. This was the act that said to the religious leaders, no, he's just not preaching. He is not teaching. He went to meddling now. This was the act that caused him to say, look, we get mean when you mess with our green. We get downright funny when you play with our money. It's one thing him wanting to be a great preacher and have popularity and talking about this heaven stuff after a while and by and the wicked cease from trouble and the rear being in wrath. It's another thing when his actions start to affect my bank account. He has to go. He has to go. And as I close, Jesus said to them, after the destruction of the money changes, he then declares the real purpose of the temple. Verse 13, he said to them, it is written, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you've made it into a den of thieves. He wasn't mincing his words. I mean, to call a devout Jew a Jew, that was a huge insult. He might as well have called them the N-word. Matter of fact, he might as well have called them the R-word, N-word. To call them a thief in the temple, in the name of God. I told you what my mama told us growing up as kids. She said, look, son, ain't nothing in the world worse than a liar, except a thief. And nothing worse than a thief